July 15th, 1853. Dear Austin, it was good to get your letter. Thank Reuben for the hiccup cure. Jupiter and I spent all afternoon picking elderberries and pine needles for the tea. I drank 5 cups and didn't hiccup once. Of course, I wasn't nervous about anything at the time, so I guess I'll just have to wait till I am and see what happens. Miss Amelia wanted me to write and ask if Reuben has a favorite pie recipe he would be willing to share. The pie social is coming up, and Miss Amelia is determined to win first place this year. She says that your Reuben is a gem on account of he knows all about making good pies and curing the hiccups. Today, as Possum and I were weeding the garden, we heard Darcy singing as usual out back in the widow needling summer kitchen. But what wasn't usual was the song she was singing. Add 2 cups of flour, half a cup of lard, half a cup of cornmeal. It was the flapjack recipe from the widow's recipe book. Darcy, who's never been to a proper school, was reading. Miss Amelia says that down in Maryland, where Jupiter and Darcy was born, it is against the law to teach a slave to read and write. Our state of Pennsylvania is free, but the trouble is there are no schools for colored close by. Later, when Nellie Heppel came over with the wool she had spun for Miss Amelia, she stopped in the yard to talk to Possum and me. I asked Nellie if she knew about Darcy's reading. She said that Darcy had been pleading to learn to read, so Nellie's older sister Hannah has been teaching her using the family Bible. Nellie said that once Darcy got the hang of reading, she didn't want to stop. I can't think why Darcy should not be allowed to learn to read and why she's got to plead to do it. There's plenty in my class who would plead not to do their schoolwork. I don't know how there can be a law that keeps folks from learning. I wonder at the men who thought up such a law why they were so determined to keep a young girl from reading from the Bible just because the color of her skin. It makes no sense, Austin. I never heard anybody make a song out of a recipe for flapjacks, and when Darcy started to sing it again, Nellie had to use his handkerchief to wipe her eyes on account of Darcy had made 2 cups of flour and half a cup of lard into the sweetest, saddest song you ever heard. Sometimes I can't help thinking about Darcy and Jupiter and how different their lives are from mine, all because of what they look like. I think about the nightmares I've been having almost every night and wonder what kind of nightmares Jupe must have had. Your brother, Levi. P.S. Miss Amelia wrote down her recipe for teacup pudding, and so I'm including it. She says to tell Reuben that if he soaks the raisins in brandy, they may plump up nice. July 20th, 1853. Dear Awesome, today Possum and I were over at the Miller store waiting for Miss Amelia to do her shopping. The usual bunch of old men were sitting out on the porch, talking, chewing, spitting, and puffing up their pipes. When Possum and I sat down on the porch steps to eat the rock candy, we heard Miss Man Potts going on about the new coach due and from Richmond. They said it makes 12 miles an hour, he claimed. Are you sure you're not confusing it with an iron horse? Mr. Tanner asked. I'm not talking about the railroad, Jeb. I'm talking about a regular coach with 4 horses. Living, breathing horses. Not living for long, traveling at 12 miles an hour, Mr. Tanner snorted. What's everybody such a darned hurry for anyway? They're liable to alter their brains moving at those speeds, expecting that one ought to quicken his step. Old Man Potts said with a nod toward the street. I looked up to see Winston loading a wagon in front of the feed mill. Why is that? Mr. Tanner asked. Word is that couple of slave catchers are due in on this coach, Old Man Potts said, and you know how they have to return empty-handed. But he's not a slave, I spoke up. Winston is a free man. He has it in writing. Old Man Potts looked over at me and shook his head. I don't expect those slave catchers will be so much interested in writing, son. My guess is they're interested in one thing, and that's color. They're looking for they're for black hides. I have to tell you, Austin, I felt my rock candy stick in my throat on hearing those last words of his. You can't blame the plantation owners. Someone else was saying, What with so many slaves running off, why is it liable to ruin them? I still contend it's a sinful business, Mr. Faber sighed. You are right on a half of account, Old Man Potts said, spitting a wad of juice from his mouth. It is business. Those cotton men are only protecting their investments, and with that fugitive slave law passed in '50s, why they've got every legal right to take back what belongs to them by law. They may have the law on their side, Mr. Faber said, but the law hasn't stopped the Underground Railroad, and once a slave gets a ticket north on the train, there's no stopping him. Miss Amelia called from inside the store just then for Possum and me to fetch her baskets. All the way home, Possum and I kept our eye on the ground, wondering about this Underground Railroad. Possum even tried putting his ear to the dirt, hoping to hear the iron horse's engine, but he couldn't hear anything except dirt, which, as you know, is pretty quiet. I'm worried about those slave catchers and wonder why they are looking for slaves above ground and not below. I suspect they are looking for some kind of secret door that leads to the Underground Railroad. I hope they leave Jupiter's paw alone. Tomorrow, Jupiter and I are going to make up another batch of Reuben's hiccup remedy tea. Possum found an old whiskey flask in his grandpa's attic. We're going to fill it with the tea, and that way I can keep it for emergencies. Best getting to bed, as the lamp is low on oil. Your brother, Levi.